Welcome in, everyone. Congrats on getting first school skeleton. And welcome in, Taka. I hope everyone's been having a really good day today. Just have to remember, the week is almost over. Well, if you have any concept of time, because I'm really losing mine. Let's see, is my microphone cutting me off? Nope. I went ahead and did a little bit of remodeling. It's a lot better than my old setup. Because my old setup was this one. But I figured it needed some more work and I need to get more done, so. A little bit more space. Brighten it up a little. And I did add the cat cam. Not that there's any cats on the bed, but if and when they come in, they'll be on there. The closest one is out in the hallway. Of course, I had to chase him out of my chair so I could sit down because he decided that he wanted to stream, and I said, no. You're a black cat, the camera wouldn't pick you up properly. Also did a little bit of update on the study. Just rearranged how things were set up a little. Need to adjust the book. Okay, that's better. Oop. Don't really need the crowd control right now. Because crowd control narrations doesn't exist yet. Hey, Guilty, welcome in. What's that? Cam cut. Well, you heard one of them. Mississippi. Rivals. Okay. There you go. But again, no cats on camera. Just cats meowing in the hallway. But it is Thursday, so of course we're going to do some more mysteries. Until I finish the book, then I'll figure out something else to do. Okay, I heard it. Did you guys hear it? I'm not gonna have to yell at sound alerts again. Okay, I heard it. What the hell? I swear, I'm not changing my settings from week to week. Yet somehow, one week it wants to work, the next it doesn't. Okay. Okay, sound alerts, why aren't you working? Better? Okay. Anyway, mysteries. Yeah. Our first story for the evening: The Tragedy of a Third Smoker. A, a story from the Metropolitan Railway by Cutcliffe Hyne. I abominate detective stories, said the QC, laying down his cue along the corner of the billiard table and going across to the shelf where the cigar boxes stood. You see, when a man makes a detective story to write down on paper, he begins at the butt end and works backwards. He notes his points and manufactures his clues to suit him. So it's all bound to work out all right. In real life, it's very difficult. He chose a Partaga, looking at it through his glasses thoughtfully. And I ought to know, I've been studying the criminal mind for half my working life. But, said O'Malley, a defending counts on a different class of animal from the common detective. Oh, is he? Said the QC. And that's all you know about it. He dragged one of the big cigars up to the deep chimney corner and settled himself in. After many luxurious shruggings, then he spoke again, between the whiffs of his Partaga. Now, I'll just state you a case, and you'll see for yourself how sometimes you have to ravel things out. The solicitor who put on the brief in his hands was, as solicitors go, a smart chap. He had to build up a big business of nothing, but criminal work was slightly out of his line. He had only taken up the case to oblige an old client, and I must say he made an uncommonly poor show of it. I never had such a thin brief given to me in my life. The prisoner was to be tried on capital charge, and if murder had really been committed, it was one of the most cold-blooded nature. Hanging would follow conviction as surely as night comes on the heels of day, and a client who gets the noose given him always damages his counsel's reputation, whether that counsel deserves it or not. As my brief put it, the case fined down to this. 2 men got into an empty third-class smoking compartment at Addison Road. One of them, Guide, was a drain constructor. The other, Walker, was a foreman of Guide's company. The train took them past the Shepherd's Bush and Grove Road Hammersmith stations without anything being reported. But at Shaftesbury Road, Walker was found on the floor, stone dead, with a wound in the skull, and on the seat of the carriage was a small miner's pickaxe, with one of its points smeared with blood. It was proved that Guide had been seen to leave the Shaftesbury station. He was disheveled and agitated at the time, but this made the ticket collector notice him, especially among a crowd of outgoing passengers. After it was found out where he was, inquiries were made at his home. His wife stated that she had not seen him since Monday, the morning of Walker's death. She also let out that Walker had been causing some annoyance of late, but she did not know what. Subsequently, on the Friday 4 days later, the Guide was arrested in West India Dock. He was trying to obtain employ as a coal trimmer on an Australian steamer, obviously to escape from the country. On being charged, he surrendered quietly, remarking that he supposed it was all up with him. That was the gist of my case, and the solicitor suggested that I should just enter a plea of insanity. Now, when I'd conned the evidence over, additional evidence to what I'd been told you, but all tending to the same end, I came to the conclusion that the guide was as sane as any of us are, and as a defense, insanity wouldn't have a leg to stand upon. The fellow, I said, had much better enter a plea of guilty and let me pile up a long list of extenuating circumstances. A jury will always listen to those, and feeling grateful for being excused a long and wearisome trial, recommend to mercy out of sheer gratitude. I wrote a note to this effect. On its receipt, the solicitor came to see me. By the way, it was Barnes, a man of his own year at Cambridge. "My dear Grayson," said he, "I'm not altogether a fool. I know as well as you that the guide would have the best chance if he pleaded guilty. But the difficult part is that he flatly refuses to do any such thing. He says he knows no killer of this fellow Walker than you and I did. I pointed out to him that the man couldn't very conveniently have slain himself, as the wound was well over the top of his head, and had obviously been the result of a most terrific blow. As a PM, it was shown that Walker's skull was abnormally thickness, and the force required to drive through it, even a heavy, sharp-pointed instrument like a pickaxe, must have been something tremendous. I tell you, Grayson, I impressed upon the fellow that the case was black as ink against him, and that he'd only irritate the judge by holding out, but I couldn't move him. He held doggedly onto his tale, and he had not killed Andrew Walker. "He is not the first man who stuck it to an unlikely lie like that," I remarked. "The curious part of it is," said Barnes, "I'm convinced that the man believes himself to be telling the absolute truth. He's not the... That is what explanation he has to offer. None worth listening to. He owns that he and Walker had a fierce quarrel over money matters, when culminated in a personal struggle. He knows that he had one blow in the head which dazed him, and fancies that he must have had a second which reduced him to unconsciousness. When next he knew he was happening, he saw Walker lying on the floor, stone dead, though he was still warm and supple. On the floor was a pickaxe, with one of its pointy, slimy in blood. How it came to be he couldn't tell. He picked it up and held it for a second. Then in an instant he thought flashed across him how terribly black things looked against him. He saw absolutely no chance of disproving them, and with the usual impulse of crude minds, resolved at once to quit the country. With that idea he got out of the Shaftesbury Road station, and being an ignorant man and without money, made his way down to the Ratcliffe Highway, St. George's Highway. Using that as a centre, he smelt about the docks at Limestone and Millwall, trying to find a job in the stokehold, but as that neighbourhood is one of the best-watched spots on earth, it is not a matter for surprise that he was very soon captured. That's about all I can tell you. I'm afraid it doesn't lighten matters up very much. I never said it would. The gist is down to your brief, Grayson. I only came round for Chambers because of your letter. Still, I persisted, you threw out a hint that Guide had offered some explanation. Oh, yes, but such was flimsy and improbable theory that no sane man could entertain for a minute. In fact, he knew it to be absurd himself. After pressing him again and again to suggest how Walker could have been killed, with the view of extorting a confession, he said, in his slow, very heavy way, "Why, I suppose Mr. Barnes, someone else could have done it. Don't you think as a man he could have got his carriage whilst I was lying there stupid and hit Walker with a pick and got out again before I come to? What would that do, sir?" I didn't think, added Barnes dryly, that it was worth following that theory any deeper. What do you say? I thought for a minute and then spoke up. Look here, Barnes, in the face of this cock and bull story, Guide persists in his innocence. There may be something in it after all, and if by any 1,000-to-1 chance we could bring him clear, it would be a red feather in the caps for both of us. Do you object to my seeing the man personally? It's a bit irregular, said Barnes doubtfully. I know it is, but bang the teeth of etiquette. But suppose we compromise, and you come with me. No, I won't do that. My time's busy just now, and besides, I don't want to run up the costs of this case any higher than necessary. But if you choose to shove your other work aside and waste a couple of hours, just go and interview him by yourself, and we'll waive ceremony. I'll get the necessary prison order and send it around to you tomorrow. Next afternoon I went down to see Guide in the waiting room of the Old Bailey. He was a middle-aged man, heavy-faced, and evidently knocked half stupid by the situation in which he found himself. He was perhaps as great a fool as to his own interests as one might often be to meet with. There was no getting the simplest tale out of him except the regular question-and-answer cross-examination. What little did he tell seemed rather to confirm his guilt than otherwise, though, strange to say, I was beginning to believe him when he kept on assuring me between every other sentence that he did not commit the murder. Perhaps it was the stolid earnestness of the fellow in denying the crime which convinced me. One only gets to be real good in facial expression when a man has watched what goes on in a criminal dock as long as you and I have done. And can usually spot guilt under any mask. But tell me, I said, what did the quarrel have to do in the first instance? Money, said Guide smoothly. Well, that's vague. Tell me more. Did he owe you money? No, it was the other way around. Wages in arrear? No, it was money he had advanced on me for working on my business. You see, Walker had always been a hard man, and he'd saved. He said he wanted his money back, and knowing that I couldn't be pinched a bit, then he couldn't pay. Then he tried to thrust himself into partnership with me in the business, which is the thing I didn't want. I'd good contracts on hand, which I expected would be in the matter of the £9,000, and I didn't want to share it with any man, least of all him. I told him so, and that's how the trouble began, but it was him that hit me first. Still, you returned the blow. Guide passed a hand wearily over his forehead. I may have struck him back, sir. I was dazed, and I don't rightly remember. But before God, I'll swear that I never lifted that pick to Andrew Walker. It was his pick. But, as I persisted, Walker couldn't have conveniently have murdered himself. No, sir, no, he couldn't. I thought of that myself since I had been there, and I said to Mr. Barnes that perhaps somebody came into the carriage while it was knocked silly and killed him. But Mr. Barnes said that would be absurd. Besides, who could have done it? Don't you know anybody, then, who would have wished for Walker's death? There was them that didn't like him, said Guide daringly. That was all I could get out of him, and I went away from my prison feeling very unsatisfied. I was stronger than ever in the belief that Guide was in no degree guilty, and yet, for the life of me, I did not see how to prove his innocence. He had not been a man of any strong character to begin with, and the shock of what he had gone through had utterly dazed him. It was hopeless to expect any reasonable explanation from him. He had resigned himself to puzzlement. If he had gone melancholy mad before he came up to the trial, I would have not been one with wit surprised. I brooded over the matter for a couple of days, putting all the tests to my patience to think it out, and I didn't get any forewonder of it. I hate to give anything up as a bad job, and in this case I felt there was on my shoulder a huge load of responsibility. Guide, I had thoroughly persuaded myself, had not murdered Andrew Walker. As sure as the case went into court, and on its present grounding, the man would be hanged out of hand. and I persuaded myself that then and there that I alone should be responsible for an innocent man's death. At the end of those 2 days, only one course seemed open to me. It was foreign to the brief I held, and the only method left to bring my client's innocence. I must find out who did it and really murdered the man. I must try to implicate some third actor in the tragedy. To begin with, there was a railway carriage, but little thought showed me that there was nothing to be done there. The compartment would have been inspected by the police and then swept and cleaned and garnished with couple on its train once more. To use an unconscious passenger for weeks since the uproar occurred to it. All that I had to go on were the notes and relics held at Scotland Yard. The police authorities were very good, of course. They were keen enough to bring off the prosecution with a professional jet. But they were not exactly anxious to hand over a poor wretch to the hangsman if he is not thoroughly deserving a chance of nonsense. They placed at my disposal every scrap of their evidence, and said that they thought the reading of it all was plain beyond dispute. I thought so too at first. They sent me the inspector to my chambers as their envoy. On one point, though, after a lot of thought, I did not quite agree with them. I held a grisly relic in my hand, gazing at it fixedly. It was a portion of Walker's skull, a disc of dry bone that had splintered aperture from the middle. "And you say that the pickaxe made the hole," I said to the inspector. "I don't think there can be any doubt of it, Mr. Grayson. Nothing else could have done it, and at the point the prick was smeared with blood." "But would there be room to swing such a weapon in a third-class metropolitan railway carriage?" "We thought of that, and at first it seemed imposing. The roof was low, and both Guide and Walker were tall men, but if Guide had gripped the shaft at the end, so his right hand pressed pretty near the head, he'd have had heaps of room to drive it in a sideways swing. I tried the thing for myself. It acted perfectly. Now here's the pickaxe. You can see for yourself." I did see it, and I wasn't satisfied. But I couldn't tell the inspector what I thought. It was clear to me that ever the man Guide had not committed the murder. What I asked the inspector was this: had either of the men got any luggage in the compartment? The inspector answered, with a laugh, "Not quite, Mr. Grayson, and you would see it here." Then I took the paper and a rough outline of the fragment of the bone, and it was an accurate sketch of the exact size of the gash on it, and the inspector went away. One thing his visit had shown me: Andrew Walker was not slain by a blow from behind by the pickaxe. I met Barnes whilst I was nibbling lunch and told him this. He heard me doubtfully. "You may be right," said he, "but I'm not bothered if it might you go upon." "You know what a pickaxe is like?" I said. "Certainly. A cross-section of bone, and one of the blades would do that." "Square, or perhaps oblong." "Quite so. Rectangular. What I want to get at is this: it didn't even be the diamond shape with these angles obtuse and acute accurately." "Oh, certainly not. Angles would be clean right angles." "Very good. Now look at the sketch of the hole in the skull, and tell me what you see." Barnes put on his glasses and gazed attentively for a minute or so, and then looked up. The pick point was crashed through without leaving any marks of the edges whatsoever. "That is to say that none of your right angles are showing." "None, but that doesn't go to prove anything." "No, it's only about a tenth of my proof. It gives a vague initial idea. It made me look more carefully, and I saw this." I poked with my pencil to the corner of the sketch. Barnes whistled. "Clean arc of a circle," he said, "cut in the bone as though a knife had done it. You saw the pickaxe. Wasn't much worn. Were the angles much rounded near the point?" "They were not. On the contrary, the pick, though an old one, had just been through a blacksmith's shop to be resharpened, and had not been used since. There was not a trace of wear upon it, and of that I am certain. Barnes whistled again in such a perplexity. At length he said, "It's an absolutely certain thing that Walker was not killed in the way they imagine, but I don't think this will get Guide off scot-free. There's too much other circumstantial evidence against him. Of course, you'll do your best, but it would be more than a toss-up if I could avoid a conviction. Quite so, we must find out more. The question is, how was this wound made? Was there a third man to it? Guide may have jobbed him from behind with some other object, and afterwards thrown it out the window." "Oh, yes," said I, "but that is going on the assumption that Guide did the trick, which I don't for a moment think is the case. Besides, if he did throw anything out the window, it would have assuredly been found. They keep the permanent way very thoroughly inspected upon the Metropolitan. No, Barnes, there is some other agent in this case, animate or inanimate, which so far we have overlooked completely, and an innocent man's life depends upon our raveling it out." Barnes lifted his shoulders helplessly and took another sandwich. "I don't see what we can do." "Nor I, very clearly. But we must start from the commencement and go over the ground inch by inch." So wrapped up was I in the case by this time that I could not fix my mind on anything else. Then and there I went out and set about my inquiries. With some trouble I found the compartment in which the tragedy had taken place, but learnt nothing new from it. The station and the railway people in Addison Road, Kensington, were similarly drawn blank. The ticket inspector at Shaftesbury Road, who distinctly remembered Guide's passage, at first seemed inclined to tell me nothing new, till I dragged it out of him by a particular emetic of questioning. Then he did remember that Guide had been carrying in his head a carpenter's straw bass, as he passed through the wicket. He did not recollect whether he had mentioned it in the police, and he didn't see that it mattered. I thought differently, with a new vague hope in my heart, and posted back to the prison. I had heard no word from the hand baggage from Guide, and it remained to be seen what he had done with it. They remembered me from the previous visit, and let me in to see the prisoner without much demur. Guide owned up to the basket once. "Yes," he said, "I had some odd tools in a care from home, and as I couldn't see anything else handy to put them in, I used an old carpenter's bass. I had an iron eye to splice on the end to the windlass rope, a job that I like to do myself, to make sure it's done safe. I never before about telling you about bass before, sir. I didn't see how it mattered." "Where's the bass now?" "Left in the left luggage office at Shaftesbury Road Station. Name of Hopkins. I've lost the ticket." "Where did you put your basket on entering the carriage at Addison Road?" "Well, in the seat, sir, in the corner window." And with that I left him. Now, I thought, I believe I can find out whether you murdered Walker or not, and drove back to Hammersmith. I inquired at the cloakroom. Yes, the carpenter's bass was there, beneath the dusty heap of other unclaimed luggage. There was demurrage to pay it, which I offered promptly to hand over, but as they could produce no counterfoil bearing the name of Hopkins, the clerk, with a smile, said that he could not let me have it. However, when he heard what I wanted, he made no objection to me having an overhaul. The two lugs in the bass were threaded together with a hammer. I took it away and opened up the sides. Within it was a ball of marline, another spurn yarn, a grease pot, and several large iron eyes. Also a large marline spike. It was the last that fixed my attention. It was brand new, with a bone handle and a bright brass ferrule. Most of the iron was also bright, but 3 inches down the point were stained with a faint brown. From the casual inspection, I should have put it down as the marline spoke having been last used to place a spike on a tapered rope, but now my suspicions made me think of something else. I raised the stained point to my nose, and there was no smell of tar whatsoever. On the bright parts, there was an undeniable odor of iron. At the tip, that thin coat of dark brown varnish blotted this agent completely away. I think my fingers trembled when I turned over the bass again. Yes, there on the opposite point of the marline spike had been lying, was tilted up over a ball of spun yarn, was a closed-up gash on the side of the bass. The spike had passed through there, and had been withdrawn. Around the gash was a dim discoloration, which I knew to be dried human blood. In my mind's eye, I saw the whole ghastly accident clearly enough now. The two men had been staying up and struggling, and Guide had gone under below, knocked senseless, and Walker stumbled to over him. Pitching forward, face downwards on the seat before he could recover, his head had dashed violently against the carpenter's bass. The sharp marline spike, with its heel resting against the solid wall of the carriage, had entered the top of his skull like a bayonet. No human hand had been raised to kill him, and yet he had been killed. I kept my own particular ramblings in this case remarkably quiet, in court up to my facts, though ordinary cross-examination. At the proper psychological moment, I called the attention to the shape of the puncture in Walker's skull, and then dramatically sprang the bass and the marline spike upon them unawares. After that, as the papers put it, there was applause in the court, which was instantly suppressed. "Oh, the conceit of the man," said O'Malley, laughing. Grayson laughed too. "Well," he said, "I was younger then, and I suppose I was a trifle conceited. The Crown didn't throw up, but the jury chuckled as not guilty without leaving the box, and then leading counsel from the other side came across and congratulated me on having saved Guide from the gallows. Now I'd have a bet anything on hanging that man," he said. Ouch. I did not read that one very steadily. But the problem with older books is text fades on it, so you can't really see all of it that well. But it is interesting to see that the man survived the court case because accidental death. I just ended up spiking the back of his own head with what was in luggage. Ouch. Wait, you get a shout out. Let's see it. Let's see, I know I did go to a shout out. I don't think I shouted out to a skeleton. Yes. Go follow Cool Skeleton. They play games, they write music, and they do art. We need a lot of those people in this store. In this group. still no cats have shown up on the bed. Yeah. I have to go ahead and do the break roll fast so I can not have the next story interrupted. So let me go ahead and take care of that. So the next story is going to be about as long as this one was. And I need to stretch, so I'll be right back. Okay, and welcome back. And to adjust my fan sim because it's freaking hot. And I'm hoping my microphone isn't picking up the fans that badly. I've got two little ones going right now. Kind of wishing I had a backless chair. But anyway, We're getting into another series of stories. The series is called The Count's Chauffeur, a series of complete stories by William Le Queux. Number 1. A Move on the 40. In Paris and Rome and Florence and Berlin and Vienna, in fact over half of the face of empire, from the Pyrenees to the Russian frontier, I am now known as the Count's Chauffeur. An Englishman, as my name, George Awart, denotes, I am of the cosmopolitan birth and education, and early youth being spent in the continent, where my father was an agent in the London firm. When I was 14, my father, having prospered, came to England and established himself as an agent in Wood Street, City, representing a great firm of silk manufacturers in Lyons. At 20, I tried city life, but an office with a high stool and a dusty ledger and sandwich lunches had no attraction for me. I had always had a turn for mechanics, but was never allowed to adopt engineering as a profession, my father's one idea being that I should follow in his footsteps, a delusive hope entertained by many a fond parent. 6 months of office life sufficed me. One day I went home to Teddington and refused to return to Wood Street, and this resulted in an open quarrel between my father and myself. With the result that a week later I was on my way to Canada. In a year I was back again, and after some months of semi-starvation in London, I managed to obtain a job in a motor factory. I was then entirely in my element. During 2 years I learned the mechanism for the various petrol-driven cars, until I became classed as an expert driver and engineer. Where I was employed, there was manufactured one of the best and most expensive makes of English car, and being at length placed on the testing staff, it was my duty to take out each new chassis for its trial run before being delivered to a customer. Upon my certificate, each chassis was declared in perfect running order, and was then handed over to the body makers indicated by the purchaser. Being an expert driver, my firm sent me to drive in the tourist trophy races on the Isle of Man, and I likewise did the Andreas circuit, and came in fourth in Brescia race for the Florio Cup in my successes, of course adding glory and advertisement to the car I drove. Racing, however, aroused within me, as it does in most motorists, an ardent desire to travel long distances. The testing of those chassis in Regent Park, and the occasional run with some wealthy customer out of the Great North Road or the Bath and Brighton roads, became too quiet a life for me. I was now seized by a desire to tour and see Europe. True, in my capacity as a tester, I met all classes of men. In the seat beside me have had cabinet ministers, dukes, Indian Rajas, members of Parliament, and merchant princes, customers or prospective purchasers, all of whom chatted with me, mostly displaying their ignorance of the first principles of mechanics. It was all pleasant enough, a merry life and good pay, yet I hated London, and the height of my ambition was a good car to drive abroad. After some months of waiting, the opportunity came and I seized it. By appointment at the Automobile Club one grey December morning, I met Count Bindo de Ferris, a young Italian aristocrat whose aspect, however, was the reverse of a southerner. About 30, he was tall, lithe, and well-dressed in dark brown lounge suit. His complexion, his chestnut hair, his erect, rather soldiering bearing, his clean-shaven face, and his open countenance gave him the appearance of an English gentleman. Indeed, I took him at first for an Englishman, for he spoke English perfectly. When he had examined my testimonials and made a number of inquiries, he asked, "You speak French?" "Yes," was my reply. "A little Italian and a little German." "Italian!" he exclaimed in surprise. "Excellent!" Then, while we sat alone, with no one in hearing, he told me the terms upon which he was willing to engage me to drive on the continent, and added, "Your salary will be doubled, providing I find you entirely loyal to me. That is to say, you must know how to keep your mouth closed. Understand?" And he regarded me rather curiously as I thought. "No," I said, "I don't quite understand." "Oh, well, there are matters, private family matters, of which you will probably become cognizant. Truth to tell, I want help. The help of a good, careful driver who isn't afraid and who is always discreet. I may as well tell you that before I wrote to you, I made certain inquiries regarding you, and I feel confident that you can serve me very much in our mutual agreement." This puzzled me, and my curiosity was further aroused when he added, "To be plain, there's a certain young lady in a very high society in the case. I need not tell you more, need I? You will be discreet, right?" I smiled and promised. What did it mean? I wondered. My employer was mysterious, but in due course I should, as he had prophesied, obtain knowledge of a secret love affair, no doubt. The Count's private affairs did not, after all, concern me. My duty was to drive on the continent, and for that he was going to pay me as I serve him loyally, and see that his tire and petrol bills were not too exorbitant. He went to the writing table and wrote out a short agreement, which he copied, and we both signed it. A rather curiously worded agreement by which I was to serve him for 3 years, and during that time our interests were to be mutual. That last phrase caused me to wonder, but I scribbled my name and refrained from comment, for the payment was already double that which I was receiving from the firm. "My car is outside," he remarked, as he folded his copy of the agreement and placed it in his pocket. "Did you notice it?" I had not, so we went out to the Piccadilly together, and there, standing in the curb, I saw a car that caused my heart to bound with delight. A magnificent 6-cylinder, 40-horsepower Napier of the latest model. The car was open, with a side entrance, and dark green body with coronets and cipher on the panels, upholstered in red, with glass removable screen on the splashboard, a splendid workmanlike car just suitable for long tours and fast runs. Of all the cars and of all the makes, that was the only one which it was my ambition to drive. I walked around it with admiration, and saw that every accessory was best and the very latest that money could buy, even to the newly invented gas generator which had only a few weeks ago been placed upon the market. I lifted the long bonnet and looked around the engine and saw those 6 cylinders in a row, the latest invention of a celebrated inventor. "Splendid!" I ejaculated. "There's nothing yet to beat this car. By Jove, can we get a move on a good road?" "Yes," smiled the Count. "My man Mario could make her travel, but he's a fool and has left me in a fit of temper. He was an Italian, and we Italians are, alas, hot-headed." And he laughed again. "Would you like to try her?" I assented with delight, and while he returned inside the club to get his fur coat, I started the engine and got in the steering wheel. A few moments later, he placed himself beside me, and we glided down Piccadilly on our way to Regent's Park, the ground where here, day after day, it had been my habit to go testing. The car ran perfectly. The engine sounded in a splendid rhythm through the Regent Street traffic into the broad Portland Place, and onto the park, where I was afforded some scope to see what she could do. The Count declared that he was in no hurry, therefore he went up through Hampstead to the Highgate station, and then to the Great North Road, through East End, Whetstone, Barnet, and Hatfield to Hitchin, 35 miles of road, which was well known to me as the Strand. The morning was dry and cold, the roads in excellent condition bar a few patches of new metal between the Conduit and Chapelfoot, and the sharp east wind compelled us to goggle. Unfortunately, I had my leather-lined frieze coat, and was therefore fully equipped. The north road between London and Hitchin is really of little use for trying to speed a car, for there are so many corners. It is mostly narrow, and it abounds in police traps. That 20 miles of flat, straight road with perfect surface from Lincoln to New Holland, opposite Hull, is one of the best places in England to see what a car is worth. Nevertheless, the run to Hitchin satisfied me perfectly that the car was not a roundabout, as so many are, but a car well within the meaning of the act. "And what is your opinion of her, Ewart?" asked the Count, as we sat down in the cold beef and pickles for a long old-fashioned upstairs room in the Sun Inn at Hitchin. "Couldn't be better," I declared. "The brake would do all the relining, but that's about it. When do we start for the continent?" "The day after tomorrow. I'm staying just now in the Cecil. We'll run the car down to Folkestone and ship her across, then go by Paris and Aix to Monte Carlo. Afterwards we'll decide upon our itinerary. Ever been to Monte?" I replied in the negative. The prospect of going on the Riviera sounded delightful. After our late luncheon, we ran back to the Hitchin to London, but not arriving before lighting up in time, we had to turn on the headlights beyond Barnet. We drove straight to the fine garage in the embankment beneath the Cecil, and after I had put things square and received orders for 10 o'clock next day, I was preparing to go to my lodgings in Bloomsbury to look through my kits in preparation for the journey, when my employer suddenly exclaimed, "Come up to my smoking room at this moment. I want to write a letter for you to take to Boodle's in St. James Street for me, if you will." I followed him upstairs to the great and tiled smoking room overlooking the embankment, and as we entered, two well-dressed men, Englishmen from aristocratic bearing, rose from a table and shook him warmly by the hand. I noticed their quick, apprehensive look as they glanced at me through the inquiry, but my employer exclaimed, "This is my new chauffeur, Ewart, an expert. Ewart, these are my friends, Sir Charles Blythe," indicating the elder man, "and Mr. Henderson. The gentlemen will always be with us sometimes, so you had better know their names." The pair looked me up and down and smiled pleasantly. Sir Charles was narrow-faced, about 50, with a dark beard turning grey. His companion was under 30, a fair-haired, rather foppishly dressed young fellow, in a fashionable suit and a light, fancy vest. Then, as the Count went to the table to write, Sir Charles inquired where we had been, and whether I had driven much in the Continent. When the Count handed me the letter, I saw that he exchanged a meaningful glance at Sir Charles, and what it was intended to convey, I could not guess. I only know that, for a few seconds, I felt some vague distrust of my new friends, and yet they treated me more equal than as a mere chauffeur. The Count's friends were certainly a merry, easy-going pair, yet somehow I instinctively held them in suspicion. Whether it was on account of the covert glance of Sir Charles shot across my employer, or whether there was something unusual in their manner, I cannot tell. I am only aware that when I left the hotel, I went on my way in wonder. The next day, at 10 punctually, I ran the car to the Strand to the courtyard up of the hotel and pulled up at the restaurant entrance, so as to be out of the way of the continuous cab traffic. The Count, however, did not make his appearance until nearly half an hour later, and when he did arrive, he superintended the dispatch by cab of a quantity of luggage, which he told me he was sending forward by Grand Vaiselle to Monte Carlo. After the four-wheeler had moved off, the hail porter helped him on with his big fur coat, and he, getting up beside me, told me to drive to Piccadilly. As we were crossing the Trafalgar Square and Pall Mall, he turned to me, saying, "Remember, Ewart, your promise yesterday. If my actions, if you think I'm a little peculiar at times, don't trouble your head about it. You are paid to drive, and paid well, I think. My affairs don't concern you, do they? Not in the least, I answered, nevertheless puzzled. He descended from the tobacconist's in Bond Street and bought a couple of boxes of cigars, and made several calls at shops, also visiting 2 jewelers to obtain, he remarked, a silver photograph frame of a certain size. At Gilling's, the 3rd shop he tried, he remained inside for some time, yet quite 20 minutes, I would think. As you know, it is the narrowest part of Bond Street, and the traffic was congested owing to the road to Piccadilly End being particularly up. As I sat in my place, staring idly before me, and reflecting that I should soon be traveling due south of the road, well-kept French roads, and out of the gloom and dreariness of the England winter, I suddenly became conscious of a familiar face in the crowd of hurrying foot-passengers. I glanced up quickly as a man bustled past. Was I mistaken? I probably had been, but the thin, keen-bearded countenance was very much like that of Sir Charles Blythe. But no, when I looked back after him, I saw this figure was much more bent, and his appearance not half so smart and well-groomed as the Count's friend. At a moment I felt absolutely positive that the man had really been watching me, and now endeavoring to escape recognition, yet at the next I saw the absurdity of such a thought. Sir Charles's face had, I suppose, been impressed upon my memory by the previous evening, and the passer-by merely bore some slight resemblance. And so I dismissed it from my mind. A few moments later, a man in a frock coat, probably the jeweler's manager, opened the door, looked up and down the street for a few minutes, shot an inquisitive glance at me, and then disappeared within. I found that the clock of the splashboard required winding, and was in the act of doing so when my eyes fell upon a second person who was equally mysterious. This time I felt convinced that I was not mistaken. The fair-moustached young man Henderson went by, without recognizing me. Either did he recognize the car. If so, what objects they had not acknowledging me? My suspicions were again aroused. I did not like either of the 2 men. Were they following my master with some evil intent? In London, and especially certain cosmopolitan cities, one cannot be too cautious regarding one's acquaintances. They had been slightly too overdressed and too familiar with the Count to suit me, and I had resolved that if I had ever to drive either of them, I would land them in some out-of-the-world hole with a pretended breakdown. The non-motorist is always at the mercy of their chauffeur, and the so-called breakdowns are frequent due to the vengeance of the driver, who gets his throttle stuck in some trouble which sounds equally serious, but which are remedied quite easily. According to how long the chauffeur decides to take his victim on the road. I wondered, as I sat ruminating, whether these 2 men were really crooks, or so deep-rooted were my suspicions that I decided, when the Count returned, to drop him a hint that we were being watched. I am not nervous by any means, and, moreover, I always carry my own protection, a little handy revolver. Yet I admit that at the moment I felt decidedly uncomfortable feeling creeping over me. These men meant mischief, and I detected it in their eyes on the previous night. By some kind of mysterious intuition, I became aware that they were in peril. Almost at the moment, the shop door was opened by the manager, and the Count, emerging, crossed to me and said, "Go into the shop, Ewart, and wait there until I return. I'm going around to get some money," and seeing a boy passing, he called him, and saying, "Just mind this car for 10 minutes, my boy, and I'll give you half a crown. Never mind the police, if they say anything. Tell them I'll be back in 10 minutes. The lad, eager to earn a trifle, at once consented, and descending, I entered the shop, the door of which was still being held open for me, while the Count hailed a hansom and drove away. The shop is one of the finest in Bond Street, and as you know, at that moment there were, however, no other customers. The manager politely invited me to invite having a seat. His lordship will only be a short time, and then, standing with his hands behind his back, he commenced to chat with me. "That's a very fine car of yours," he said. "You ought to be able to travel pretty fast, eh?" "Well, we do, as a matter of fact," I replied. Then he went to the door, and looking over the panes of frosted glass, asked what the horsepower was, and the number of other questions which non-motorists always plague the chauffeur. "Nice going." Then, returning to me, he remarked that a very nice gentleman his lordship was, and adding that he had been a customer on several occasions. "Have you been long in his service?" he inquired. "Oh, yes," I replied, determined not to be thought as a new hand. "Quite a long time. As you say, he is a very charming man. He's very wealthy, according to the report. I read something about him in the papers the other day, a gift of some thousands to a hospital fund." This rather surprised me. I never remembered having seen the name of Count Bimbo de Ferraris in the papers. Presently I got up, and wandering about the shop, inspected some of the beautiful jewels in the fine showcases, many of them ornaments of enormous value. The manager, a pleasant elderly man, took me around and showed me some of the most beautiful jewelry I had ever seen. Then, excusing himself, he retired to the office beyond the shop, and left me to chat with one of his assistants. I looked at the clock and saw that nearly half an hour had elapsed since the Count had left. The constable had looked and inquired about the car, but I assured him that in a few minutes we should be off, and begged, as a favor, that it might be allowed to remain until my master's return. Another quarter of an hour elapsed when the door opened, and there entered two respectably dressed men in dark overcoats, one wearing a soft brown felt hat, and the other a bowler. They asked to see the manager, and the assistant who had been chatting to me conducted them through the shop to the office beyond. Both men were of middle age and well set up, and as they entered I saw a third man, much younger, was with them. He, however, did not come in, and stood in the doorway, idly glancing up and down Bond Street. Within the office I distinctly heard the manager utter an exclamation of surprise, and then one of the men, in a deep, low voice, seemed to enter into a long explanation. Then the elder of the two strangers walked along the shop to the door, and going outside spoke some words to the man who had accompanied them. On re-entering he passed me, giving me a sharp glance, and then disappearing again into the office, where for 5 minutes or so remained closeted with the manager. Presently the last-named man came out, and as he approached me I noticed an entire change in his manner. He was pale, almost to the lips. "Will you step into my office for a moment?" he asked. "There's, a little matter of which I want you to speak with you." This surprised me. What could he mean? Nevertheless, I consented, and in a few moments I found myself in a large, well-lit office with the manager and the two strangers. The man in the brown felt hat was the first to speak. "We want to ask you a question or two," he said. "Do you recognize this?" And he produced a small square photograph with a man upon whose coat was a white ticket, bearing a bold number. It started when my eyes fell upon it. "My master," I ejaculated. The portrait was a police photograph, and these men were detectives. The inspector, for such as he was, turned to the jeweler's manager and regarded him with a significant look. "It's a good job we've arrested him with the stuff on him," he remarked. "Otherwise you'd have had his color again. He's working the same dodge in Rome and Berlin, and both times got clear away. I suppose he came a small customer in order to inspire confidence, eh?" "Well, he came in this morning saying that he wished to give his wife a tiara for the anniversary of their wedding, and asked me if he might have two on approval, as he was decided which to choose, and wished her to pick for herself. He left his car as chauffeur until his return, and took away two worth £5,000 each. I, of course, did not have the slightest suspicion. Lord Inkswell, the name by which we know him, is reputed everywhere to be one of the richest peers in the kingdom. Yes, but you see, Detective Sergeant Rodwell here chanced to have him come out to the shop, and recognizing him as a jewel thief, we wanted for some months and followed his cab to Charing Cross Station, and there arrested him and brought him to Bow Street. I stood, utterly dumbfounded at the sudden ending of what I believed to be an ideal engagement. "What's your name?" inquired the inspector. "George Ewart," was my answer. "I only entered the Count's service yesterday." "And yet you told me you had been the chauffeur a long time," exclaimed the jeweller's master. "Well," said the elder detectives, "we shall arrest you at any rate. You must come round to Bow Street, and I warn you that any statement you may make will be taken down and used in evidence against you." "Arrest me?" I cried. "Why, I haven't done anything. I'm perfectly innocent. I had no idea that—" "Well, you have more than an idea now, haven't you?" laughed the detectives. "But come along. We have no time to lose." And he asked the manager to order a four-wheeled cab. I remonstrated in indignation, but to no avail. "What about the car?" I asked anxiously as we went outside together and stepped into the cab. A third police officer, who had been on guard outside, holding the door, while the constable, who had been worrying me about the car, stood looking on. "Diplock, you can drive the motor car," exclaimed the inspector, turning to the detective at the cab door. "Just bring that round to Bow Street as quick as you can." The constable took in the situation at a glance. He saw that I had been arrested and asked the detectives if they needed any assistance. But the reply was negative, and with the inspector at my side, the sergeant opposite, we moved to Piccadilly, the jeweler's manager having been requested to attend the Bow Street police station in an hour, in order to identify the stolen property. By that time the charge would be made out, and we should, the inspector said, be up for the magistrate for remand with the court rose. As we drove along Piccadilly, my heart fell within me. All my dreams of those splendid, well-kept roads in the sunny south, and the touring of the greyest places in the continent, and seeing all that was to be seen, had now shattered in a single blow. And what a blow! I had awakened to find myself under arrest as an accomplice of one of the most expert jewel thieves in Europe. My companions were not communicative. Why should they have been? Suddenly I became aware of the fact that we had driven a considerable distance. In my agitated state of mind, I had taken no notice of our route, and my captors had, it seemed, endeavored to take any attention off the direction we had taken. Collecting my scattered senses, however, I recollected that we had crossed one of the bridges over the Thames, and looking out the window, I found that we were in a long, open road of private houses, each with a short strip of railed-off garden in front, South London thoroughfare, evidently. "This isn't the way to Bow Street," I exclaimed in wonder. "Well, we're not exactly going a straight way," grinned the inspector. Roundabout road, you can call it." I was puzzled. The more when I recognized a few moments later that we'd come down to Camberwell New Road and were passing Camberwell Green. We continued up Denmark Hill until at the corner where Campden Hill branches off, the inspector called to the cabman to stop, and we all descended, and the great detective sergeant paying the fare. Where were they taking me, I wondered. I asked, but they only laughed and would vouchsafe no reply. Together we walked up the quiet semi-rural Champion Hill until we reached Green Lane, when at a sharp right angle of the road as we turned, I saw before me an object which caused me to hold my breath in utter amazement. The car was standing there, right before me in the lonely suburban road, and in it, seated at the wheel, the man whom I had next second recognized as Count himself. He was evidently awaiting me. He was wearing a different motor coat that bore a different number, and as I approached, he noticed that the coronets of cipher had been obliterated by a dab of green paint. "Come on, Edwards," cried the Count, jumping down to allow me to take his place at steering. I turned to my captors in wonder. "Yes, away with you, Edwards," said the inspector, "and good luck to you." Without another second's delay, I sprang upon the car, and while the Count, as He jumped by my side, shouted goodbye to my captors, and started away towards Lordship Lane in this open county of Surrey. "Where shall we go?" I inquired breathlessly, utterly amazed at her extraordinary escape. "Straight on through Sydenham, and then I'll tell you. The sooner we're out of this, the better. We'll run along to Winchester, where I have a little house in Kingsworthy, just outside the city, and where we can lie low a bit more comfortably." "But shan't we be followed by these men?" I asked apprehensively. "Followed by them? Oh, dear, no," he laughed. "Of course you don't understand, Edwards. They're all three belong to us. We played the smartish game upon the jeweler, haven't we? They had to frighten you, of course, because it added a real good touch of truth to the scheme. We ought to be able to slip away across the channel in a week's time at latest. They'll leave tonight, in search of me." And he laughed lightly to himself. "Then they were not detectives," I exclaimed, utterly staggered by the marvelous ingenuity of the robbery. "No more than you are, Ewart," was his reply. "But don't bother your head about it now. All you've got to look forward is your driving. Let's get across to Winchester as quickly as possible. Just here, take a sharp right and the first that takes us left to the Guildford Road. Then we can move." That was an interesting start to a series. Let's see how long these are on average. Each one runs about 10 pages. I can try to read another one. I don't know. What do you guys think? Yay, it played. So, next story. The Count's Chauffeur, a series of complete stories by William Le Queux. Number 2, A Sentimental Swindle. Count Bendo's retreat near Winchester proved to be a rather small, isolated house near Kingsworthy. It stood on its own grounds, surrounded by a high wall, and at the rear was a very fair garage that had been specifically constructed with an inspection pit and various appliances. The house was rather well furnished, but the only servant was a man who turned out to be none other than the yellow-haired young fellow who had been introduced to me at Cecil as Mr. Henderson. He no longer wore the light fancy vest and smartly cut clothes, but it was a somewhat shabby suit of black. He smiled grimly as I recognized him, while his master said, "Got back all right, Henderson? I arrived only 10 minutes ago, sir. All was quiet, and wasn't it? Oh, absolutely, replied the Count, who then went upstairs, and I saw him no more that evening. For nearly a fortnight, the car remained in the garage. It now bore a different identification plate, and to kill time, I idled about, wondering when they should start again. It was a strange menage. Count Bindo was a very easygoing cosmopolitan, who treated both Henderson and myself as intimates, inasmuch we ate at table with him and smoked together each evening. We were simply waiting. The papers were, of course, full of the clever thefts and killings, and the police, it appeared, were doing their utmost to track the tricksters, but in vain. The Count, under the name of Mr. Claude Fielding, seemed to be very popular in the neighborhood, though he discouraged visitors. Indeed, no one came there. He dined, however, at several houses during the second week of his concealment, and seemed to be quite confident of the safety. At last we left, but not, however, without Sir Charles Blythe had stayed one night with us, and made some confidential report to his friend. It being apparent that all was clear, and some further alteration was both made to the appearance of the car and to the personal aspect of Count Bindo and myself, after which we started to the continent by way of Southampton. We crossed and ran up to Paris, where we stayed at the Ritz. The Count proved a devil-may-care fellow with plenty of friends in the French capital. When with the latter, he treated me with the servants. When alone, I was a friend. Whatever the result of the clever piece of trickery in Bond Street, it was quite clear that my employer was in funds and spent freely, dined and supped at the most expensive restaurants, and thoroughly enjoyed himself with his chums. We left Paris and went to the broad road of Lyons to Monte Carlo. It was just before Christmas, and the season had, of course, not yet commenced. We stayed at the Hotel de Paris, and the hotel where most men and garçons put up. In the car I put into the Garage Mignon. It was the first time I'd seen Monty, and it attracted me as it does every man and woman. Here, too, Bindo de Ferrari seemed to have hosts of friends. He dined at the Grand, the Metropole, the Riviera Palace, and supped each night at Ciro's, indulging in a little mild play in the rooms of the interval between the two meals. He did not often go out to the car, but frequently went to Nice and Cannes by train. About a fortnight later, after our arrival, however, he ran, one bright morning, along the lower road to Brignoles to Nice. Bad, by the way, on account of the sharp corners and electric trams, and called at a small hotel at Boulevard Gambetta. The Count apparently had an appointment with a tall, dark-haired, extremely good-looking young French girl, with whom he had lunched at a small restaurant, and afterwards he walked for an hour on the promenade, talking with her very earnestly. She was not more than 19, a smart, very chic little Parisian, quietly dressed in black, but the clothes that bore unmistakably a cachet of the first-class dressmaker. They took a turn at Jeté Promenade, and presently returned to the hotel, when the Count told her to go and get a close hat and a thick coat, and he would wait for her. Then, when she had gone, he told me that they were about to take her over to Bristol at Bartholomew, that great white hotel that lies so sheltered at the most delightful bay of the whole Riviera. It was a clear, bright December afternoon. The roads were perfect, though dusty as the Grange always is. And very soon, with the Count and his lady friend, I swung into the curved drive before the hotel. "You can go to the garage for an hour or so, Ewart," my employer said. After then, they descended. Therefore, I turned the car and went to the huge garage at the rear of the hotel, a garage which every motorist on the Riviera knows well. After an hour, I re-entered the hotel and looked for the Count to receive orders, when I saw, in the great red-carpeted lounge, my employer, the little Parisian, seated with a man whom I knew as Sir Charles Blythe, but who really was one of the Count Bindo's confederates. We exchanged glances, and his was a meaning one. That some deep and ingenious game was in progress, I felt certain, but what it was, I had no idea. Blythe was smartly dressed in a grey flannel suit and white shoes, a costume de rire of the Riviera, And as he smoked a cigar and easily reclining in one of the wicker lounge chairs, he presented the complete picture of the English aristocrats putting in a month or two in the sunshine. Both men were talking earnestly in French with a dark-eyed little lady who now and then laughed, or, raising her shoulders, looked from one to the other and protruded her chin in a gesture of uncertainty. I retired and watched closely. I could quite plain in a few moments see that the young lady was entirely devoted with handsome Bendo. Both manner and glances betrayed her. I saw him look at Blythe, and then they were working it towards some prearranged end. Presently, a noisy part of the American girls who had just entered from the Monte entered and sat close to them, calling for tea. Therefore, the trio rose and went into the evening dusk. They wished, it seemed, to talk in private. I received orders to bring the car round and drove them the three black to Nice, which we reached in plenty of time for dinner. "Now, you will not forget, Gabrielle, you're sure?" said Bendo in French as he handed her out of the car and shook her hand as he bared his head. "I have promised, monsieur," was her reply in a low, rather musical voice. "I shall not forget." Then she bowed to Blythe and ascended the steps and disappeared into the hotel. Her quietness and neatness of dress to me were quite attractive. She was a dainty little thing, yet her plain black dress, so well cut, was really severe. She had the manner of a lady, sweet and demure. The air of a woman of the world was, somehow, entirely absent. Well, to confess it, I found myself admiring her very much. She was, I thought, delightful, one of the prettiest girls I'd ever seen. Evidently our run to Beaulieu and back was her first experience of motoring, for she laughed with girlish delight when, on an open piece of road here and there, I put on a move. And as she disappeared into the hotel, she turned and waved her tiny black-gloved hand back to the handsome Bendo. "Done, my dear chap," chuckled Blythe in a low voice to his companion, as a neat figure disappeared behind the glass swing doors. "The rest is easy, and if we keep up pluck." "It's a big thing, of course, but I'm sanguine enough," declared my employer. "That little girl is a perfect brick. She's completely unsuspicious. Flattering court woman, and if she falls in love with you, she'll go to any length to serve you." "You're a splendid lover," declared Sir Charles as he mounted into the car beside the Count, while the latter, laughing lightly, bent to me, saying, "Back to the Monte Carlo, as quick as we can get." I slipped along out of Nice and through the Villefranche, through Barclay, and slowing up round the corners, and traveling sharply on the open road, and we were soon back at the Paris. Having put the car into the garage, I walked around to the hotel and transformed myself into a little leather-coated chauffeur into a Monte Carlo lounger, and just before 10 o'clock met the Count going across the flower-scented place to the rooms. He was alone and recognized me and crossed and said, "Ewart, let's walk up through the gardens. I want to have a word with you." I turned on my heel and strolled with him. "You know what we've done today. You stand in so that you can just shut your eyes to anything that isn't exactly in order, understand? There's a big thing before us, a very big thing, a thing that's simply dropped from the clouds. You want money, so do I. We all want money. Just keep a still tongue and obey my orders, and you'll see that we'll bring off the biggest coup that the Riviera has ever known." "I know how to be silent," I said. I did not like the aspect of the affairs. "Yes, you do. I give you credit for that. One word of this, and I will go a Durnsville. Silence, and the whole world of us will profit and get the wherewithal to live. I often think, Ewart, that in public, as they call it, the British public are extraordinary people. They are so confoundedly honest, but nowadays there surely isn't any honesty in life, at least not that I've ever found. Why, your honest businessman who goes to church and chapel every Sunday and is a model of the virtues in the city is the very man who will drive a hard bargain and pay a starvation wage and button his pockets against a widow. Who are you successful men in business? Why, for the most part, the men who, by dint of sharp practice or unscrupulousness, have been able to get in front of their competitors. Therefore, after all, am I very much worse than the successful city man? I live on my brains, and while I'm happy to say I've lived very well, up to the present, but enough of this philanthropy, laughed the easygoing young scoundrel. I want to give you instructions. You will stand in with us, Ewart. Your share of the Gilling affair is your credit, and you'll have it gone before long. At present, we have another little martyr at hand, one which requires extremely delicate handling. But it will be successful providing Mademoiselle Gabrielle doesn't change her mind. But women are so fickle, and mourning brings prudence far too frequently. You'll see some strange happenings tomorrow or the next day. Keep your eyes and ears closed. That's all you have to do. You understand, right? Well, perfectly, was my reply, for my curiosity was now thoroughly whetted. There was a desperate project in the air, and the spirit of adventure had now entered thoroughly into me. Early next morning I drove the Count back to Nice, from a quiet spot in the Magnon, where he met the pretty Gabrielle clandestinely. When we drew up to where she was apparently waiting for us, I saw that she was annoyed at my presence. "Ewart, my chauffeur," he exclaimed, introducing me, "will say nothing about this meeting. He knows how to be discreet." I raised my peaked motor cap as our eyes met. I thought I detected a curiously timid glance in them. For an instant she dropped her gaze. That she was an intimate friend of the Count was shown by her instructions he gave her. "You two walk down the Promenade d'Angleterre, and I'll meet you at the other end by the Hotel Suite. I'll take the car myself to the garage." This meant I was to walk with her a full 3/4 of an hour along the whole of the seafront of Nice. Why, I wondered. "But, Bindo, can't you come?" "I'll meet you outside the Suite. It's better to do that," he answered. "Go along, you'll find Ewart a clever fellow. Tell her how you drive a motor car." She laughed, and then, as Bindo mounted the car again and turned away, we strolled together on the broad asphalt back towards the town. The morning was delightful, the bright sunshine and blue sea. The sweet-smelling wallflowers were already out, and the big palms were lazily up the soft breeze. I quickly found my companion most charming, and envied the Count in his acquaintanceship. Was she marked down as a victim, or was she an accomplice? I could not grasp the motive for being sent to walk the whole length of the promenade with her, but the Count and his companions were, they admitted, working a big thing, and this was part of it, I suppose. "This is the first time you've been to Nice, huh?" she asked in her pretty broken English, as she stopped a moment and opened her sunshade. "Yes," I answered, "but the Count is an old happy, I believe." "Oh, yes," she laughed. "He knows everybody. Last year he was on the Fence Committee and one of the judges of the Battle of Flowers." And so we gossiped on, walking leisurely and passing many who, like ourselves, were idling in sunshine. There was an air of refined ingenuousness about her that was perfectly attractive. She walked well, holding her skirt tightly about her as only a true Parisian can, and displaying a pair of extremely neat ankles. She inquired about me, how long I had been in the Count's service, how I liked him, and such, while I, by careful questioning, discovered that her name was Gabrielle de Luz, and that she came from the Côte d'Azur each season. Just as we were opposite the white facade of the Hotel Westminster, we encountered a short, rather stout, middle-aged lady, accompanied by a tall, thin, white-haired gentleman. They were well-dressed, and the lady wearing splendid sables. She started when she recognized him, instantly lowering her sunshade in order to hide her face. Whether the pair noticed her, I cannot say. I only know that, as soon as they were past, she exclaimed in annoyance,
I can't think why Bimbo sent you along here with me.
"I regret, mademoiselle, that my companionship should be distasteful to you," I said, mystified.
No, no, not that, Marcel, she cried anxiously. I do not mean that. You do not know. How can you know what I mean?
"You probably mean that you ought not be seen walking here in the Promenade d'Anglaise with a common chauffeur."
If you are a chauffeur, Marcel, you are also a gentleman,
she said, looking straight into my face. "I thank mademoiselle for her high compliment," I said, bowing, for really I was in no way adverse to a little mild flirtation with a delightful young companion. And yet what I wondered was my role in this latest complicated trickery. She quickened her pace, glancing anxiously at everyone we met, as though wishing to arrive at the end of our walk. I was very sorry our little chat was drawing to a close. I would like to have had her in my side the day's run in the car, and I told her so.
Perhaps you will take me on a long trip one day. Who knows?
She laughed.
Yesterday it was perfect.
A few moments later we arrived at the suite, and from a seat in the promenade, Count Bindo was to greet us. He had left his motor coat and cap in the car, and stood before us in gray flannels and white soft felt hat. Smart, handsome figures, such as women honestly admire. Indeed, Bindo was essentially a ladies' man, for he seemed to have a bowing acquiescence with hundreds of the fair sex. "Why, Gabrielle and Edward have been saying lots of pretty things to you, eh?"
Oh, how kind of you,
she protested, blushing slightly.
You really ought not to say such things.
Well, forgive me, won't you?" said the Count quickly, and together we strolled into the town, where we had an appetite at the gay Café de l'Opera, opposite the public gardens. Here, however, a curious contrement occurred. She accidentally upset her glass of Demelay over her left hand, saturating her white glove so that she compelled to take it off. "Why," ejaculated the Count in sudden amazement, pointing to her uncovered hand, "what does that mean?" She wore a ring upon her wedding finger. Her face went crimson, and for a moment the pretty girl was too confused to speak.
Ah,
she cried in a low, earnest tone as she bent before him.
Forgive me, Bindo. I did not tell you. How could I?
You should have told me. It was your duty to tell me. Remember, we are old friends. How long have you been married?
Only 3 weeks. This is my honeymoon.
And your husband?
4 days ago, business took him to Chennai. He is still absent.
And in the meanwhile, you meet me and our little Gabrielle of the olden days, eh? Remarked Bindo, placing both elbows upon the marble-topped table, looking straight into her face.
Do you blame me then? She asked. I admit I've deceived you, but it was imperative. Our encounter has brought back all the days of summer, and about 2 years ago when we met at Fortinam. Do you still remember them?
Her eyes trembled. I saw that, though married, she still regarded the handsome Bindo with a good deal of affection. I don't blame you, was the soft reply. I suppose it was anybody else would have done in those circumstances. But do I remember those days, you ask? Why, of course I do. Those picnics in the forest with your mother and your little sister Julie were delightful days. Days never return, alas. And you are really worried. Well, you must tell me about it later. Let's lunch together at the London house. Then he added reflectively, Really, this is a discovery. The little Gabrielle is actually married. I had no idea. She laughed, blushing again.
No, I don't suppose you had. I'm very, very foolish to take off my glove. Yet, if I kept it up the deception much longer, I might perhaps have compromised myself.
Was it not, well, a little risky for you to go to Bali with me yesterday?
Yes, it was foolish, very foolish, Bindo. I ought not have met you today. I ought not have told you the truth from the very first.
Not at all. Even if your husband is away, there's surely no reason why you should not speak to an old friend like myself, is there?
Yes, I'm known in Nice, as you're aware.
Known as the prettiest woman who comes on the Riviera, he declared, taking her hand and examining the wedding ring and the fine circle of diamonds above it. Bindo de Ferrari was an expert at gems.
Don't be a flatterer, she protested with a light laugh. You've said that, you know, hundreds of times before.
I've said only what's the truth, and I'm sure Ewart will bear me out. I do, most certainly. Madam is most charming, I sustained. It was undoubtedly an honest opinion, and I was, however, disappointed equally with the Count's to discover that the dainty divinity in black was married. She was certainly not more than 19, and had been the self-possessed air of a matron about her. Twice during that conversation I had go out, and the Count bade me stay, saying with a laugh, "There's nothing in this that you may not hear. Madam has deceived us both." He treated the situation as a huge joke, and yet I detected that the deception had annoyed him. Had the plans he had laid out upon by the unexpected discovery of the marriage? From his demeanor and suppressed chagrin, I felt sure that they had been. Suddenly I glanced at his watch, and then taking from his pocket an envelope containing some small quarter of an object, about 2 inches long and 1 inch broad, he said, "Go to the station at 12:15 from Burley to Cannes. You'll find Sir Charles Blythe on the train. Give him this from me, and say that I'll meet him at Booth's side at Cannes at 4 o'clock. Have the car ready at 2, I'll come to the garage. You haven't much time to spare, so take a cab." I rose, raised my hat to the dark-eyed little woman, and bowed gracefully, and then, mounting up to Facara, drove rapidly to the Avenue de la Guerre. The situation was decidedly interesting. My ideal of a Sunday morning had been shattered. Gabrielle of the luminous eyes was already a wife. I met the train and discovered Sir Charles looking out for me. I handed him the packet and gave him the Count's message. I noticed that he had some light luggage with him, and I presumed that he was moving from Ballieu to Cannes, to the tea and tennis bow site. Then, when the train had moved off, I wandered across a small restaurant opposite the station and lunched alone, thinking and wondering about the dainty little girl-wife who had so completely fascinated me. That she was still in love with Bindo was quite clear, and yet, on his part, was distinctively annoyed at being perceived. At 2 o'clock, almost punctually, he had entered the garage and flung his hat onto the car and put on his cap, goggles, and motor coat. And without a word, I drew up the 40. "Naka," he came out to the road. "To Cannes, quick," he shouted. "Around to the right in the room wagon, and straight ahead. You saw Blythe?" "Yes, I gave him the packet of the message." "Good. Then we haven't any time to lose. Get a move on wherever you go." On we flew, as fast as the sharp corners would allow, until presently we slipped down the long hill to Cannes, and passing through the town, pulled up to the bow site, where we found Sir Charles awaiting us. The latter had changed his clothes, and now was in a smart blue serge suit, and was idly smoking a cigar as we swept around to the entrance. Two men met enthusiastically. Some words were exchanged in undertone, and both burst out laughing, a laugh of triumph. Was it the expense of poor little Gabrielle? I was left outside to mind the car, and waited for fully an hour and a half. As the wind blew bitterly cold at sundown, as it always does in the Riviera in December, and I was glad to have my big fur coat. Whatever the subject of discussion, it was evidently a weighty one. Both men had gone into Blythe's room and were closeted there. A little after 5, Blythe came out and hailed a cab and drove away into town, while the Count, whose appearance was so entirely changed that I scarcely knew him, sauntered slowly down the hall after his friend. Blythe had evidently brought some of the fresh clothes from Monte Carlo, and he had used his room as a dressing room. He looked very much older, and the dark brown suit he now wore was out of shape and ill-fitting. His hair showed gray over the years, and he wore gold spectacles. Instantly I saw that the adventurous scheme was still in progress, so I descended and lit the big headlights. About a dozen idlers were in the vicinity of the car, and in sight of them all he struggled into the big motor car, and entering gave me orders to drive to the center of town. Then, after we got clear of the hotel, said, "Stop at the station. We have to pick up Blythe." Directed by him, we were soon at the spot where Sir Charles awaited us. "I've got him," he exclaimed in a low voice as he took out the gasp, took out a big coat and motor cap and goggles. "Quick work, wasn't it?" "Excellent," declared the Count, and then, bending to me, he added, "Round there to the left. The high road is a little further on. To Marseille." "To Marseille," I echoed, surprised that we were going so far as 100-odd miles. But at that moment I saw the wide highway and turned into it, and our big searchlights throwing a white radiance on the road. I set the car westward through St. Raphael and Les Arcs. It commenced to rain, with a biting wind, and turned out very disagreeable nights, but, urged on by both men, I went forward as quick as a pace as I dared to go on the road, over which I had never before traveled. At Toulon we pulled up for a drink, for by that time we were all three chilled to the bone, notwithstanding our heavy leather-lined coats, and then we set out again for Marseille, which we reached just after 1 o'clock in the morning, drawing up the Rue de Paris, which every visitor in the capital of southern France knows so well. Here we had a pretty good meal of the cold meat and bach. Prior, however, to entering Marseille, we had halted, changed our identification plate, and made certain alterations to further disguise the car. After supper, we all got in again, and Bindo directed me up and down several long streets until we were once more in the suburbs. In a quiet, unfrequented road we pulled up, where from beneath the dark shadow of the wall a man silently approached us. I could not distinguish his face in the darkness, but from his voice I knew him to be none other than Henderson, the servant from Kingsworthy. "Wait here for half an hour, then run the car back to the church I pointed out to you as we came along, the one at the top of the Channelbert. Wait for us there. We shall be perhaps an hour, perhaps a little more," said the Count, taking out a stick from his car, and then the trio disappeared into the darkness. Fully an hour elapsed, until at length the long shadow three kept crushing up cautiously, each one bearing a heavy bundle wrapped in black cloth, which they deposited in the car. The contents of the bundles chinked as they were placed upon the floor. What their booty was, I knew not. The next instant, however, all three were in. The door was closed, and I drew off in the dark, open road straight before me, and out into the driving rain. The Count, who was at my side, seemed panting and agitated. "We brought it up all right, Ewerts," he whispered, bending his knee moments later. "And behind's over £20,000 worth of jewelry for us to divide later. We must get to the Valence for breakfast, and thence Henderson will take the stuff away to the train by Holland." "But how? What have you done?" I asked, puzzled. "I'll explain in the morning, when we've got rid of it all." He did explain. Blythe and Henderson both left us at Valence and booty, while Bindo and myself, in the morning sunshine, went towards an easy pace along the Lions Road. The affair wanted just a little bit of delicate maneuvering, he asked. It was an affair of the heart, you see. We knew that the pretty little Gabrielle was married to old Lamar, a well-known jeweler in Canberra and Marseille, and that she had gone to spend her honeymoon in Nice. Unknown to either, I took a room of theirs at the hotel, and thanks to the communicating doors they have foreign hotels, I overheard the husband explain that he must go to Genoa on pressing business. He also left her safe keys, the duplicates of those held by his manager at Marseille, and injunctions to keep them locked up in her trunk. I allowed him to be absent for a couple of days, then, quite unexpectedly, I met her at the promenade, pretending, of course, that I was entirely unaware of her marriage with old Lemaire. In case of accident, however, it was necessary that the little woman should be compromised with somebody. And as you were so discreet, I sent you both yesterday morning to walk the whole length of the promenade. In the meantime, I nipped back to the hotel, entered Gabrielle's room, obtained the 2 safe keys, and took impressions of them in wax. These I put into a tin matchbox and sent them by you to Blythe station. Blythe, with his usual foresight, had already engaged a locksmith in Cannes, telling him a little fairy story of how he lost his safe keys, and how his manager in London, who had duplicates, had sent him the impressions. The keys were made to time. Blythe took the cab to the hotel and got them, and rejoined us at the Cannes station. Then we went on to Marseille. There was a fare easily after, but more risky. Henderson had already been reconnoitring the shop for a week, and had conceived a clever plan by which he got in from the rear, quickly opened the 2 big safes with copied keys, and cleared out all of Omar's best stock. I'm rather sorry to have treated little Gabrielle so, but after all, it really doesn't hurt her, for old Omar is very rich, and he won't miss £20,000 as much as we're in need of it. The loving husband is still in Genoa, but poor little Gabrielle is no doubt thinking herself a fool for having so prematurely shown her wedding ring. I don't know if the ads ran. It says that the pre-roll is killed. Oh, now it says ad break coming in 5 minutes. But let's hit the 2-hour mark, so... Let's see who might be on to raid. I can say, now that you've heard some rivals of Sherlock Holmes, how about listening in on some regular Sherlock Holmes? Those are, of course, the standard raid messages. First one for followers, second one for subscribers. Not that I have any. So, again, thank you all for coming in. There will be fairy tales tomorrow. And I will hopefully see you all tomorrow night for Friday Night Fairy Tales.